Facilities meeting to order, and if I could have a motion to approve the minutes of October 27th by John, seconded by Evelyn. Any changes, corrections, deletions? Hearing none, call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So moved. And our action agenda is to hear a proposal by the Open Door County Detention Home is the location. We're looking for a one-year temporary basis for a Code Blue shelter. And I guess if you want to step to the podium, or who wants to speak, and then we'll do our question and answer.
Good morning, everybody. Many of you know me. I'm Mark Schachner. I'm an attorney with Miller, Mannix & Schachner in downtown Glens Falls. I'm here with Kim Cook and some others on behalf of the Open Door. Unless you want us to, we're not going to belabor who and what the Open Door is, the Open Door mission, because we think you already know that. Why we're here is that we are seeking county support, not just passive county support, but active county support. And what we mean in this case by active county support is we'd actually like to use the former juvenile detention facility for the Code Blue emergency shelter operation this coming winter. There's been some media coverage on this, including an article in today's Post-Star that's largely accurate. If you read it, that's pretty much what we're here to talk about and what we're here to secure your, hopefully, permission and authorization to do. The Open Door mission has been responsible for running Code Blue for a couple of years now. For anybody who doesn't know what Code Blue is the need for emergency shelter for homeless people. And Warren County here, we do have some homeless people, unfortunately. Not as many as larger urban areas, but not only a few. Code Blue kicks in when the temperature is going to be 20 degrees or below, or when there's a precipitation forecast of 12 inches or more. Pretty harsh winter conditions. It's strictly an emergency winter seasonal shelter operation for those in need of physical shelter. Our proposal is to use the former juvenile detention facility right across the road that way. And just for this season, Open Door's ultimate goal is to find a permanent, secure facility to use for Code Blue and other uses as well. Many people, maybe everybody knows that we had a Code Blue emergency shelter operation in downtown Glens Falls last year. We thought we'd be able to continue at that location this year. That didn't pan out. We're here on November, whatever today's date is, November 18th, in dire need of securing a situation for our emergency shelter for homeless because it's November 18th. And those of us who know anything about living here, which is pretty much everyone in this room, know that this is going to kick in sooner. The need is going to kick in sooner rather than later. Our emergency shelter is staffed by trained volunteers. There are 2 volunteers on premises at all times, one of whom must be awake at all times. Our hours of operation are in the evening, approximately 6 p.m. to in the morning, approximately 8 a.m. So it's only a nighttime emergency shelter requirement. It's only a nighttime emergency shelter facility. We limit our occupancy to no more than 19 men and women. They're separate rooms, for overnight stay, there's separate rooms. And we can go into as much detail as you like about our operation, but that's the parameters of it. We're asking the county's support by authorizing and allowing us to use the former juvenile detention facility building for this operation this coming season. We looked at, this is no secret, I'm not talking out of school, we looked at locations in downtown Glens Falls because that would actually be more practical in the sense of serving the needy people that we serve. But we had a lot of problems, and ultimately we were not able to find another place in downtown Glens Falls once we were unable to use where we used last season. We've looked at other county buildings, including in this complex and across the road and likewise, and there aren't any really feasible other county buildings. The former juvenile detention facility is very appropriate. We're prepared to provide insurance because we think we should do that and we think that's appropriate, and we're sure that your county attorney and county administrator would recommend that you require we have insurance, and we are on board and prepared to provide insurance. We will pay for utilities. That we think that's only fair as for the use. Our volunteers will clean up the building and staff the shelter. It's in pretty decent shape. We've done the tour with your county personnel. It's actually in pretty good shape, but we'll clean it up and staff the shelter. This is actually sort of, in our mind, a three-entity partnership, actually, between, or among, I should say, Open Door, the city of Glens Falls, and you all, meaning the county. I just said what we, Open Door, will provide. The city is gonna provide bus transportation for the people that need to secure the shelter availability. You may be thinking, well, is this an ideal location? The answer is no, it's not an ideal location, but the city's agreed to provide bus transportation for the people that need this emergency shelter facility from downtown to here in the evening, and from here back downtown in the morning. And then, of course, you all, the county, we're hoping you'll allow us to use the building from, soon until March. And also, we would like to ask the county to continue to provide snow removal and trash removal, if at all possible. In our minds, it's a sort of a three-party partnership, Open Door, the city of Glens Falls, and Warren County. We would thank you for helping us provide safe emergency shelter for the struggling segment of our population that so desperately needs it. It would be for this coming season only, as far as we currently plan, and that's basically our pitch. Kim Cook, the executive director of Open Door, is here to answer any questions that I can't answer about the details of our operation, but we're hopeful that the committee would recommend to the full Board of Supervisors a resolution for Friday morning authorizing this use.
Okay, questions from the committee. John?
Yes, when you said that you will provide insurance, is that both property and liability?
Correct.
And when you say that the bus transportation will be provided by the city, did you mean the AGFTC?
That's our understanding is the city's using AGFTC, the smaller buses, for shuttle purpose, dedicated for this use on these nights for this run. So in other words, it would be a special bus trip, if you will.
Yeah, but the AGFTC is
I believe so. I don't believe the city has any,
No, I don't believe the city has any buses.
We actually have some of this, summarized in a handout sheet, but I don't know if people got it or didn't get it.
I didn't get it.
I don't think so, so I'll send it down.
All right.
How are you?
Rachel?
Yeah, that's right, Greater Glens Falls
I
Transit.
certainly,
Thank you.
I'm sorry. you
I'm
weren't
sorry,
finished?
Jan, I thought you were done. I'll
No, one more
and yield the
question.
floor. Go ahead.
How many people are we talking about?
Up to 19.
Okay.
We have more copies if it doesn't reach all the way around to, Ron and Rachel. Did you guys get?
We need one more, please.
Here we go.
Oh, no, we're good.
You good?
Anything
You
else,
all set,
Jan?
John?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel?
I'm certainly a supporter of the Open Door and the Code Blue concept. Of course, I learned a lot about it at your most recent fundraiser. But I do have some concerns and some questions, and if you would just bear with me as I ask them. Most of what I've learned about this has been through the Post-Star. I think this is something that's probably happened relatively quickly. But I haven't had time to talk with the people that I represent in Queensbury. And I had a brief conversation with our Ward 3 councilman for the town of Queensbury, Doug Irish. He has many concerns about this being in his ward. I have not had time to discuss thoroughly with him what those concerns are and able to address them. So certainly, I kind of feel like I'm not in a position to make a vote today about it without having more information from Queensbury. But I guess some of my first and foremost questions would be, will it include, well, one, have you looked at the Civic Center? I mean, you're talking about ideal locations. Certainly, we funded a lot of money towards the Civic Center. It's downtown Glens Falls. Has that been a discussion that's taken place with them?
I'll answer quickly, and if Kim or any of the other people here in support of us have a better answer, I urge them to provide it. But the Civic Center is not authorized for residential overnight stay, so to speak. And I strongly doubt that the Civic Center would fulfill New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code requirements, because it's not a residential facility. One of the reasons that this building is attractive to us is because of its prior use as a temporary residential facility.
Okay. And will this also include housing children?
I don't think we've ever had children. We don't intend to have children.
So if someone came with children, I noticed Saratoga's, I just looked briefly at their Code Blue this morning, and they do include children. So I wondered if that would be an option.
We don't take children at the shelter. When someone comes in with children, the procedure is that we call the police, they put them in a hotel overnight, and they have a cab ride to social services the next morning.
And then just knowing what little I know about, or trying to learn quickly about social services, but, and maybe even, Chairman Simpson can answer it, but how come in situations like this, a similar procedure wouldn't follow with those that would be eligible under social services laws?
Many of the guests at Code Blue are already falling through the cracks and may have been sanctioned by social services or whatever. It's supposed to be people who don't have that option.
Okay, the people that are coming to you are not eligible for social services for whatever reason.
Yes, I mean, we don't ask a lot of questions that way, but most of them are in that.
I mean, just if I could add to that for a second, this is not like an active recruiting program. The idea behind Code Blue is we're the stopgap, last safety measure, however you want to put it. People that are able to house themselves in any other manner, hopefully, that's not who we cater to. Like Kim says, there are people that fall through the cracks for any number of reasons. That's who we cater to. We're not out actively recruiting, hoping to drum up business for Code Blue, just the opposite.
Well, I wouldn't
Our dream
assume
would
you
be,
were.
our dream would be that there's no need for Code Blue, but that's
Right.
not reality.
It made me think of it when you talked about how you handle the children and families when they,
Sure.
appear. And then pets, I take it, you don't accept pets, or that's never happened?
It's never happened.
And are there any restrictions, or, I noticed with Saratoga, they make a point of saying there's absolutely no restrictions, so I'm assuming criminal background, things like that, there's no checks, as you just said, it's kind of an immediate need?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. It's both figuratively and literally part of the quote-unquote open door. We have Open Doors run Code Blue for 2 years with no incidents, no problems, or any difficulties of the like. But you're essentially correct.
Okay, so no restrictions. And
There is excuse me for interrupting, no alcohol or drug use is allowed on premises. If you call that a restriction, we're strict about that. No alcohol or drug use allowed on premises.
And at any one time, how many people, I know you can serve up to 19, but have you been full at times with 19?
Yeah, we averaged 14 a night last season, but there were nights that we had up to 21 people, and we put someone in a hotel for a night.
And I guess my last question is just regarding Westmount, has there been any discussions with the nursing home on their feelings about this proposal and if it would have in fact any impact on them?
I think the answer is no. We know that the Westbound situation is in flux. Everybody knows that in terms of transition. But we can't envision any way there's any impact because of not exactly the temporary nature of the use, but I guess what I mean is the fact that we're literally in this particular operation only on nights that are below 20 or below, 12 inches or more precipitation.
Right.
Last year, by the way, we all remember last winter, unfortunately, there were runs where it was multiple nights in a row. That's somewhat unusual pattern-wise, especially as many nights as we had in a row, but it's really the most minimal, in that sense, in terms of impact operation you can imagine, because it's only those limited hours, only on those really, really bad winter nights.
So in your opinion, it wouldn't have an impact, but either Martin or Paul or Dan, have you guys talked with them about their feelings on it, or being so close to another county entity?
I have not had any discussions with either our own Westmount staff or the new buyers. If the committee wanted to, certainly we could do that.
And I have somewhat of a simplistic idea on it. They're human beings trying to seek
I'm not saying
shelter.
they're not. I'm just asking
I don't know what the...
questions. And as I stated, I'm
it could be...
the mission and what you do, but
We're
I
gonna,
think it's
we're
fair
gonna
to
hear,
ask.
we're gonna hear a little later from Dr. Van Dyke, because they're interested in it, moving, over there. They've made a presentation. We have some work to do and some more dealings and negotiations, but she would like to be heard because, that piece of property is certainly of interest to them and their future. I know, will we be talking to Westmount about that? I'm just trying to answer your question with
I don't
different
know.
things that come up, so.
The only other thing
Chairman,
about, in terms of impact on Westmount or the surrounding uses, if, I don't know what would be happening if we were talking about a completely different kind of use where our 19 patrons were driving cars to the facility. There's tons and tons of parking, but the fact is 0 of our 19 patrons are driving cars to the facility. the Glens Falls bus brings them up, drops them off, and leaves. So as far as we're concerned, and this is happening in the evening on the opening side and in the morning on the closing side, we see no impact at all.
Okay, thank you.
Paul?
Mr. Chairman, just to, further address my remarks earlier, because I was looking at it from the perspective of addressing this particular use. But as the chairman brought up that, Marilyn Van Dyke has expressed some interest, from the Historical Society to eventually, becoming a permanent resident of that building, I want to also tell the committee that just recently, Centers has also said that they might be interested in buying both of those buildings over there. So, there is that interest on the table as well that just came up. And then a while ago, and I don't know if it's still true, Supervisor Stroud, at this point, but I know the town of Queensbury had expressed through their rec department some interest in the buildings, but that seems to have dropped at this point, but
I haven't heard anything on that.
lately, so it's probably not an issue anymore, but that's everything I know in terms of eventual use of the buildings. Now, one of the things I would recommend to the committee is that, part of our overall transaction in the end, and I've also shared this with, Mrs. Van Dyke, is that, we are gonna be studying that neighboring property to determine what is the best use for that property in the end. And, so it may be premature to have a permanent, solution to what we're gonna do with those buildings, but at least it's on the table as to who has interest in them. This here, as I understand it, is just a temporary use for this season only, is that correct?
It's absolutely correct, and I was gonna respond to the county administrator's comments by saying that just so we're clear, this is not our permanent solution. We do not wish to use this facility on a permanent basis. And by that I mean not only that we are only seasonal for this season, but it's our goal to not be needing it next season, by which I mean next year.
John? Rachel, are you set? I apologize.
Dates of use, when would you like to move in, and when do you plan on moving out?
There's not a lot of move-in required, so from our perspective, as soon as Code Blue requires it, we'd be prepared. You know, we're gonna move quickly. If you authorize this on Friday, we'll do what we need to do quickly enough so that literally when Code Blue kicks in, which none of us control as far as I know, we'd be ready to take our guests, our overnight guests, and then we say until March because in our experience, there's never been a 20-degree or under 20-degree, 12 inches of snow situation after March.
So, 4 months? You're looking about
I mean,
maybe,
November.
maybe 4 months?
Yeah, yeah. December,
And
January, February, March.
Just for the season
Yeah.
until you find a more suitable location?
Exactly so.
And, is the building ready for up to 21 people? I mean, the septic system's okay, the water's okay, the showers are okay, the windows are sealed, the roof's not leaking, everything ready?
You wanna feel that, Jeff?
Sure. My understanding is, the building's been winterized, it would take a little bit of time to get it up and running, but it's essentially ready. Structurally, it's sound, the building, functions fine. Any modifications in the building would be purely cosmetic or operational as far as, rearranging anything or modifying the building. There's a couple of things to consider with the building. Right now, that building the electricity is fed, by the cogen. We did budget into 2016, some money to bring that back onto the grid. So if there are right now, the utility costs are borne, through the cogen. So that would have to be arranged, how that works out until we can get it back onto the grid. With the sale and everything, it could be a little bit complicated, I guess, for a few months. The other thing is, just from the maintenance standpoint, the snow and ice removal has been limited in recent years because the buildings have been closed. And back when the buildings were occupied, it was a combined effort of Westmount facility. Skip Besaw would send trucks over there. So that's something to sort out, how we're gonna manage that, operationally for my crews, both my buildings and grounds crew and my highway crew. I don't think we have any trash receptacles over there, but I'm sure we can put something over there and collect that. I wouldn't imagine that they generate a lot of trash, right? And, but as far as the building goes, my understanding it's essentially ready. We just have to bring everything back online, and then we'll have to think about how to transition the electric service.
Well, if we're gonna close on Westmount December 31st, we probably better have this issue out of the way, so there might be at least a few hours' time where we shut off one system to reconnect to the other system. We can do if we need to put a line in from the road, that shouldn't be too bad. And then you put the box on, everything's all ready to connect, and then you shut off the system from Westmont, disconnect, reconnect, should only be a few hours. So.
Yeah, we can certainly manage that.
In other words, it won't be days, which would be a problem with allowing this use, but it would only be a matter of a couple hours probably, doing electrical work. All right, so, and the septic system would be suitable for the number of people using the facility?
You know, my understanding is that it would be fine with its prior use as a detention home and as a transient housing. I don't think there's any issues there.
Okay, so it's probably sized accordingly. Because the detention home, the adolescent detention home, that was used as a adolescent detention home for years and years and years and years, and nobody even knew it. Nobody even knew what was in there. I expect the same here, that nobody's even gonna know that, you know, this is a shelter for, you know, people that need it.
Okay, any other committee members, questions? Mark?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming today. This, important issue that needs to be addressed, and you certainly are, human beings that need to be cared for, so I appreciate the work you do. I just have a few thoughts. One, I guess, is for the county. Is there any cost to Warren County for doing this, just so we let the budget officer know? Is there any expense that we're gonna incur for this?
Well, I believe that they've asked that we pick up the snow plowing, so that would be an expense. The garbage would be an expense. Anything else that you were expecting from Warren County?
No, that's all we've asked, and from our perspective, as I said, we view it as sort of a three-entity partnership, and we would hope that those extraordinarily minimal expenses would be something the county would be willing to expend. I mean,
And
those strike me as pretty minimal three-figure type expenses.
wouldn't the offset be that we normally pay for the heating, and now that is gonna be picked up by them, so there's
Yes,
gonna
the
be somewhat of an
extended heating.
offset?
Well, I think, Jeff, it's been very minimal heat in that building, right?
Yeah, the heat has been turned down, and, the only other expense I could think of would be any building emergencies. The county doesn't own, you know, with the exception of the nursing homes, obviously, but they have full-time coverage and staff, to cover any building emergencies that are off hours. That would be the only other thing, and I don't know if Open Door has, you know, an on-call contractor, if something goes wrong on a weekend or in the middle of the night when you have, when you're operating, or whether that would fall to the county. There would be some overtime expense maybe occasionally for that.
But,
Mark still has the floor here. Mark, I'm sorry, go ahead.
John, I was going along the same lines as John Stroh on it was a juvenile, delinquent home, so you're right, nobody really knew that was going on, so my next question had to do with your volunteers, the training that they undertake, and, you know, what are their responsibilities and, you know, their obligations while they're there? Could you just go over that with us?
We do like a half-day training with our volunteers. We give them safety instructions, we go over our rules and kind of give them an idea of the guests that we're, you know, working with. And there's always someone on that has had more experience with newer people, so part of the training is as they walk through it. Really, they're there to oversee, to have relationship with the guests, and make sure that there's no emergencies, and make sure somebody gets fed when they come in, check them in, see that things run smoothly. It's pretty basic stuff.
Pretty basic stuff, and you've been through this drill before, and you've got, reliable volunteers that you can call on to handle this. The, last question I have is on the busing. I can see why you would prefer not to do this and have your facility on there. That sounds like a pain in the neck, but you've worked all those logistics out, and is it the city that's gonna pick up the cost of that?
Correct, the city will be providing the bus transportation.
Yeah, they'll be providing it. So how does that work? Somebody's homeless, it's 20 degrees, they go to the open door, and is that where they get picked up? How does it logistically work?
We haven't worked out the details as yet. The mayor has offered that they will take care of this, so if we end up here, then we'll work out all the details. But it most likely will be that either the bus stop downtown or the open door, they'll be picked up from there, brought up, and, they'll be taken back there in the morning, so there won't be a whole lot of walking in and out. It'll be in and out on the bus.
So it's intended to be a one-night stand, if there are special circumstances like...
It can be more than one night in a row, but it wouldn't be staying through
Yeah,
the next night.
They leave the next
Correct.
day and
Correct,
get them through the night.
correct, that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions? Rachel?
I just have a follow-up to a couple of Mark's questions, and I remember working as a victim advocate in the juvenile detention home and how really nice that home was and how well it worked. But just to follow up to two things, I see here that, you know, they play games or they watch TV, so an additional cost would need to be phone or internet, I'm assuming cable.
If we do anything like that, that'll be our expense.
Okay, so you would
Cover that.
cover that.
Part of utilities.
Oh, okay. And then, two questions really for, Chairman Gerard. One, I know I've heard before that when we go back to the grid from the cogen, like this has been a discussion we've been having for a long time, that it's a big cost. Is it not? Am I mistaken? I mean, is that not a big cost for us?
I don't think this is gonna be that expensive. There's overhead utility lines that go up to the former, annex building. And I
Okay.
think we would come overhead off of those existing poles. I think we budgeted $1,000 into 2016, and we think that's conservative to do the
Okay.
we don't think it's gonna be that bad.
And then, certainly having that building used for this, type of a service until March, Paul, you don't think that would make, a negative impact towards centers in terms of their consideration of buying? They'd be fine till waiting until that service was over, or?
You know, and this was just recent that they mentioned it, they said, would the county be interested? That's as far as it went, because I would have to bring it back to this committee first, and I had planned on doing that at the regular committee meeting.
Okay.
But, I haven't had, you know, any in-depth discussion with them at all, so I don't know. I would think that we'd wanna get through the transaction, close on the facility, and then pursue it. And then the only other concern, though, as I expressed earlier, though, my recommendation would be that we not jump on any deals with them until we really explore what we wanna do with the entire parcel, because my concern is that those buildings are actually up on the rest of our property, that 20-some-odd acres that we have. And I would be concerned that if we did something there, we may regret it later, because it may not have any impact, but I just wouldn't know until we know what our master plan is. So I'd be recommending we develop what we really wanna do with that whole parcel, and then make decisions. And, of course, I see Mrs. Van Dyke over there too, she's
Right.
wants one of those buildings as well, so.
And then lastly, Chairman Gerard, you had discussed, I think at a couple facility meetings ago, about the old jail, you know, and I think specifically you had said something about the Code Blue shelter being there. Was that looked into? I mean.
That was, asked about, and I believe it was discussed when the mayor came up, but maybe,
We have,
Paul
Mr.
can
Chairman, Charlie Wallace is here, but also, Ms. Cook went through those facilities as well, and I believe they made some determination, because that's one of the things I suggested, because I know that the committee in the past, or at least some of the members of the board, had discussed about the fact the jail's already heated, can we use it? And so they did review that facility, and I think there were some issues there. Perhaps, maybe we could start with Mrs. Cook, and then if Charlie has anything to say.
I think it was Supervisor Taylor recommended that.
Oh, sorry, I
Yeah.
can't remember. Did you?
It was at one of our meetings.
Okay.
I mean, one issue that jumped right out at us is our understanding is that the old former jail facility has a lead paint issue. We don't wanna be putting people there, and we understood there was an abatement required, and we can't possibly undertake the abatement.
Okay.
We actually
Lead and
looked at,
asbestos.
3 different buildings, that we walked around, like jail, detention home, and the, old building that we were in. Only one, from a phase of occupancy,
Charlie, could you just stand up so we could hear you just a little bit better? I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
The only building that didn't need to kick in a sprinkler system under change of occupancy was the detention home, because that was an existing art facility. The other building would have been classified as the business office, and of course the jail would have been institutional. So that, I believe that's where you run into problems in other buildings you've had.
Yeah, exactly, I'm glad you mentioned that, it's on our handout, but that's neither here nor there. Actually, our biggest problem in looking for alternative sites in downtown Glens Falls, we were able to come up with a number of possible sites, typically commercial buildings, sometimes basements of commercial buildings, but because they were not previously used as residential facilities, they were gonna kick in code requirements for sprinklering, which is way, way, way beyond our economic means, and in keeping in mind that even if we had the money, you know, sometimes six-figure money, we wouldn't wanna be using that money on a one-season use when we're looking for a permanent facility elsewhere. And, you know, every dollar we spend on sprinklering is a dollar that's not being spent on our other, programs that benefit the underserved. So he's absolutely 100% correct.
Thank you. John, did you have another question?
No, I think you kinda got answered. In the meantime, my question was, all right, I'll ask it. How do we divide up the cogen's production of energy, since they're gonna be picking up the electric bill? How does cogen, do we have it broken down so that this particular building is using this kilowattage and, we don't have it broken down like that?
No.
So they won't pay for the electricity until we actually transfer it over into, a separate entity?
It is not metered separately. We can measure it, we have, gauges, we can measure it and come up with some ratio. It would probably be, you know, minute compared to the usage at Westmount, I'm guessing.
Oh, it would
But-
be, but.
But we can, if we're proceeding to an agreement and wanted to charge for some, we could measure, we have ammeters that we can place on the panels in the building and measure the usage directly by what is actually flowing through the lines.
Well,
Or it could be, you know, a set fee, or we could just, carry the cost on the cogen. I think the real problem becomes for the county is once the building is sold, if it's not on the grid, then it becomes a little more complicated, because then we've got, centers feeding the building.
if we approve this, and we're gonna go in this direction, we put in right now, which we probably should anyways, get this separated and start doing it now, we could have that wrapped up before the end of the year.
I have in my notes to, put in a service request to National Grid immediately,
Yeah.
and we'll proceed immediately regardless.
Right.
Any other committee members?
Mr. Chairman, I was just gonna comment, there was a formula by which that cost was shared, because when the WIC building was occupied and the detention home was occupied, there was a sharing of the cost of electricity, because we couldn't pass, you know, that cost on to that. So we could go back and take a look at that formula and see if that'll work, if there is any time period that causes a problem. I think that, I just wanna point that out, that was done. I think we could go back and probably use the same formula, and obviously it worked before, so I think it could probably work this time.
And just so we're clear, we're happy to make our pro rata contribution, and we don't care if it's an estimate. If it's an estimate of, you know, here's about what the, you know, X-bedroom house facility uses on a per-night basis, we're happy to make our pro rata contribution.
And Marilyn, I'm just gonna wait on it, I'm gonna have the other supervisors that aren't on the committee ask their questions, and then I'll certainly give you your time. I don't mean to be rude and not acknowledge you, okay? Supervisor Brock?
Yeah, why are we charging them for electricity? I mean, these are homeless people, the money's gonna have to come from people who either give donations or the government anyways, and it's not like we're nickel and diming them, just, you know, why bother worrying about the electric? We have $148 million budget, and we can't give them a couple dollars to cover the cost of electricity and utilities. Just seems, like I said, nickel and diming.
Any other questions from any other supervisor? Bud?
You might remember that I was involved with the Open Door for about 7 years. I got a soft spot there. Because of that, you know, I think we should do whatever we can do to make this happen. I agree with
that we have been functioning under in Glens Falls is that it's 20 degrees and a foot of precipitation. We have someone outside of our organization in the past has been Gary Ferris, with the Red Cross, who actually calls it. He's calling it 5 to 10 days ahead, according to forecasts. There have been nights that we've been open because it was forecast to be low and it was actually a little warmer. There were other nights that we were forecast to be closed and it got a little colder. The problem is we have to get our volunteers lined up, so we can't change within a day. But that is what we've been functioning under. It's the same in Saratoga and Albany. And actually, it used to be 10 degrees, and when we opened, we started at 10, and we got Albany, Saratoga, and Glens Falls together, and everyone agreed to open at 20 degrees instead. The other issue with that is I'm not sure we can staff it beyond that. Staffed on volunteers, you know, we burn out volunteers pretty quick in the winter when it's 101 nights. So as much as my heart wants to stay open, we've been okay with those rules.
Long-term plans, are they going to be to do something more than that, or could you go to having a shelter open 100% if you try to at one point?
Our plan is we're actually looking at buildings now and working toward going into a capital campaign where we would have a larger kitchen and dining room as well as a year-round shelter program with different levels as well as resource center and teaching area.
I've worked for Open Door, as you know, for several years, as you did, but I was shocked and appalled at the numbers, the 20 degrees and the 12 inches of precipitation. But right now, Saratoga Springs, City of Albany, and City of Glens Falls, that's the parameter as we stand here now.
Okay, any other supervisors with questions? Hearing none, Marilyn?
Marilyn Van Dyke. I head the facilities committee for the Warren County Historical Society, and we're one of the organizations that's interested in the two buildings that are up on Gurney Lane. We have had an initial presentation to the county, and the county has asked us to hold while they determine their boundary lines and the sale of the nursing home. So we are on hold with them, waiting to go back to confer with them further about our plans for the two buildings. I do have a copy, though, that I'd like to share with your group of the architect's inspection report. We had an architect come on board, and we paid to have both of the buildings up on Gurney Lane inspected, and they came up with several suggestions for things that the buildings need, and I think that we should be aware of these suggestions so that you don't get in there and find that you have some problems. I also have with me Faith Bouchard, who is the new director of our Historical Society, who's been on board only a short while, and Joan Aldous, who is a member of our Facilities Committee. I'll pass this around to anyone who needs a copy. Page 5 is what I'm going to be looking at here. On the top of page 5 it says Building 2, the former detention home. A wood railing assembly of the exterior second floor exit stair must be changed to comply with code. You could not occupy this building unless you comply with the code. So the handicap ramps and so on also have to be considered for the building. You need an exterior handicap ramp to provide access to the main floor level. And there are no handicap toilets in the building. There are cracks and damage, deteriorated areas, much of which cannot be hidden or maintained by new repairs in the building. And though most rooms, the metal enclosures on the hot water baseboard heating elements are in bad condition, having suffered intentional damage by previous occupants, and all of those should be replaced. So in these reports there are the items that need to be considered in order for occupancy to be granted to the anybody who's going to be using it. Did you get a copy?
No, we'd love a copy.
He's got one here somewhere that we can just give him right now. Okay, we'll give it back to you.
But, thanks, but just so the committee's clear, these requirements would not kick in for Code Blue because we would not be considered a change in use under the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code. If a change in use were to occur, there's a slew of code requirements that might kick in. We would be not considered a change in use because of the prior use remarkably similar as a residential facility, in this in your case, juvenile detention residential facility.
And Charlie, you're in agreement with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Meryl. Any other questions from the public? Travis?
Yeah, I was just wondering if anyone knows whether the detention home has been certified lead-free?
I'd have to check that. I think we did a survey, hazard survey, in anticipation of consideration of, changes in that building, but I'd have to verify that. I don't recall offhand.
If it's not lead-free, then the same concerns that you would have for the jail would apply. I have a question here. If someone, I understand that, you know, the bus between that facility and somewhere down Glens Falls, not knowing yet exactly where that is, but what happens if someone shows up at your doorstep, it's, you know, 10 below zero, and would like to come in? Are they gonna be allowed in, or do they have to only come in on this bus arrangement?
In the past, we've let them in no matter what time they come in, the first time. Once they know our rules, there's a curfew. And that'll run around the bus time somehow.
So I have a concern, you know, you don't ask questions and people show up, you don't know if they're hanging around the area, knowing that it might be a good area to hang around. Which gets back to my biggest concern perhaps, that, you know, when I discussed this with two ward councilmen, none of them were aware that this was even being considered, even though our supervisor is on this committee and did not bring that to their attention. And so I would think that the public should have some say in this before it happens. I do understand that there's, you know, critical time here, but the public needs to be respected as well. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, hearing none.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry, Martin?
Just a couple of thoughts from my perspective. I think that when you look at the proposed use, and obviously we've gotten quite far in the discussion here, I think that from the legal perspective, I think that the county certainly could enter into a use agreement, a lease agreement for this purpose under County Law 215. It seems to me that there's, you know, all of the requisites are there, consideration, etc. So I think that it's something that the county would have a valid legal purpose in pursuing. The question of insurance was raised earlier, and I don't know, it was a question, I believe Attorney Shackner mentioned that we would be providing insurance. As often is the case when we have a new use or a new proposal like this, we reach out to Rose and Kiernan. We did so. We spoke to Lee Pollock, who's our consultant there. He got back to us in a very timely fashion with some suggestions. I don't think that there's anything about this use in particular that, as far as an insurance perspective, that can't be addressed. My guess is, although I can't be certain, is that the Open Door probably has the requisite insurance in place already, but we can certainly work with the Open Door on that. And there was, you know, just a typical discussion about if there is an accident or something like that, a notice provision, but that's all typical when it comes to these types of agreements. As far as supervision, when you have your folks there, can they leave the premises? Or are they supervised at all times?
They're not like in lockup, if that's what you mean. Yes, they're supervised. There's two people on premises at all times, one of which must be awake at all times. We've frankly not experienced a situation where people that are seeking emergency shelter because they're homeless on a night that's less than 20 degrees and or has more than a foot of snow wish to leave the premises. That's not really something we've experienced, and we don't really anticipate experiencing that. Least of all at this location. While that's not why we're picking this location, not to disagree with one of the citizen commenters, but I spend more time in the Gurney Lane Park recreational general area than probably any human being, and this is not a place that people hang out. This facility is not really a place that people hang out at night. I drive through here almost every night on my way to or from a municipal board meeting. The place we're looking at across the road is not someplace that people want to leave and hang out outside when it's less than 20 degrees and there's more than a foot of snow, and they're homeless to begin with.
There was a discussion earlier, I believe it was, broached by Supervisor Sieber about criminal backgrounds and things of that nature. Do you know from your experience whether or not, there are registered sex offenders who would be within this population?
No, we don't.
Okay. So it's possible, but it's not for certain, correct?
Certainly not for certain,
Okay.
but it's theoretically possible.
Okay. I guess I just, that seems to me to be something that, I wanted to just look at and address. When we look at that population, as you know, we, at one point, had a local law that addressed this. That local law, as many local laws throughout the state, was deemed essentially superseded through the legal concept known as field preemption, that the state has enacted a comprehensive plan. So our local law was superseded. I did look at this. Amy looked at it as well. And and this is where I'm going with the supervision. I don't think the concerns about proximity, believe it or not, about proximity to Gurney Lane or proximity to the Rush Pond Trail system present any particular concerns from my legal perspective as I understand the law that's in place now. I think those laws are more applicable to schools, school playgrounds, daycare centers, etc. Interestingly enough, there was a proposal that made it through the state Senate that would talk about level 2 and 3 offenders being precluded from residing in or participating in family shelters. I don't know that this would constitute a family shelter. It may very well not, particularly because you're saying there's no youth there.
Not only that, but a family shelter is typically someplace that a family can move to and reside at,
Right.
albeit perhaps temporarily,
Right.
on a 24-hour basis.
Right. I didn't view this as a family shelter as I understand it, and that law proposal didn't make it through review anyway. I understand that it may be being brought up again. We do have, and I think this is something that I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention, obviously we have a vulnerable population at the Westmount Health Facility. And that's why I was inquiring about the supervision, et cetera. I think that having a vulnerable population nearby is not necessarily a reason not to do this. I think having a vulnerable population nearby is just a reason to identify that we have that, to discuss it, and to work with you as far as supervision goes, et cetera, so that folks, I agree with you, Attorney Schachner, that there is not a lot of congregating that's going on in that area. It's not a place to hang out. It's not a, other than to recreate, and during the months that you're talking about, there would be, in the recreation, correct me if I'm wrong, Supervisor Stroud, there would be some snowshoeing, some cross-country skiing, those kinds of things, but I don't think the playground...
Not at night.
Not at night. Well, maybe at night. Maybe at night.
No, actually not at night.
Okay.
I cheat and take my dog there at night,
Okay.
but the signs are pretty clear that the park closes at dusk.
Okay. Your candor's appreciated. It just seems to me that again, I want to emphasize, that's not a reason, the proximity to Westmount is not a reason not to do this. It's a reason, I think, to simply have a discussion about that and what you view your participants as doing or not doing, as the case may be, while they're at the facility.
And if I could, I'd like to add what I think is a layer of comfort to that discussion. I gave an incomplete answer to an earlier question, and to fill out the rest of my answer, once our guests show up in the evening, they check in, they actually are not allowed to leave until departure time the next morning. So that should add a layer of comfort as well.
Okay, any other questions to be fielded? Supervisor Beatty?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just have one question. I noticed on your sheet here, Mark, absolutely no drinking, use of drugs allowed, and so forth. And then you got down, in the case of an unruly guest, we call police. Just out of curiosity, in the past year, how many times, you probably had...
Once, I think.
One time, yeah. Yeah, and I thought...
That's probably our average.
I was gonna get zero for one time, okay.
I'll call it one.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. McDevitt?
It's getting colder, you know, the other vulnerable population is homeless, and, let's rock and roll, and let's take care of this vulnerable population.
Fred?
I'll move it.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor, seconded by Supervisor Westcott. Discussion, Evelyn?
I want some clarity on the motion. I was kind of sketching out what I thought the motion would be, in which case, let me know if this is kind of where you guys are going. I'm thinking that we would do a lease agreement for this winter season with the county to provide the snow removal and trash and electric, the open door to do the remaining utilities, whatever they are, staff it, provide the insurance, and that Glens Falls will provide the transportation. Is that essentially where?
Yeah, what they proposed is.
I think
Well,
it's a-
we had the suggestions from the other supervisors about the electricity, and that's what I was looking more or less for clarity.
I don't have any problem with that.
Mr. Chairman, if...
I don't have a problem with it either, paying for it.
Martin, you wanna?
I just,
You should know,
I
the
think,
budget officer knows that.
Mr. Chairman, I think Supervisor's Wood definition, is much welcomed and appreciated. It raises a question that I had for Attorney Shackner that I should have asked him. Mark, do you view this as a three-party agreement, or is the city simply providing transportation and the agreement is between you and us, correct?
Correct, the latter.
Okay, got it. And on the utilities, I'm fully in favor of the idea that I believe Supervisor Brock and Supervisor Taylor came up with, and that's to simply cover it. I have no problem with that. However, it seems to me that if during the term of the agreement there is an ability to turn this over on the grid, and if that's going to happen anyway, it seems to me that we may want to have at least a means available within the agreement to revisit that utility issue.
We have no problem with it.
Okay.
Rachel?
I'm inclined to vote yes, and obviously fully support this, but with 2 days before the full board meeting, I do want the opportunity to talk with, some residents in Queensboro as well as our Ward 3 councilman, to include him in that dialogue and to address whatever concerns he might have, which you may have in fact just answered all of them, but I don't know until I speak with him. But you previously said it's not lockdown, but you did just clarify that once they sign in, they're not allowed to leave till the departure time.
But it's a rule, but not a lock.
Okay,
Well,
so
you're right.
during that rule, that
You could
time,
call
if somebody does leave, my only question, I'm just trying to answer a question I know that's coming to me later on. Do you call the police at that point if somebody's leaving in the middle of the night? It's obviously cold, they have nowhere to go, like what's the, protocol?
In the past, we've been downtown Glens Falls. It was easy for somebody to leave and go to something else and want to come back. The rule is that if they want to leave, they can, but they are not allowed back in that night. So, obviously, this is new. We're far out of Glens Falls. I don't think it's gonna happen. If it does, we could work with our staff and volunteers to make sure they're taken out of the area if they want to leave. But that's just a new thought. I haven't worked that out.
Well, I suspect our sheriff would be very friendly to helping in any way that they could.
I
As
don't
well
wanna
as
see-
exceptionally nearby.
Right.
Correct. You know, I just wanna make sure that I can at least, explain to a resident in that area that if in fact that situation occurs in the unlikely event that there's a protocol in place where you might be notifying or that you would notify a law enforcement entity or an emergency responder to assist.
Sure.
Mark?
The benefit, I think that's,
Right.
that's a pretty scary scenario, anybody leaving that facility at 2 AM in the morning and it's done, below 20 and pitch dark out there. I would hope you would want, your volunteers would notify the authorities. That's not a good scenario for that person.
Any other questions? We have a motion on the floor. I have one question myself. Would you have, anything against the sheriff's department if at the public safety committee it was brought up that they would stop in, check on the proctors, make sure things are okay? Is that an issue that you would be negative towards?
Well, actually, my plan was to, reach out to the sheriff because we would be under his jurisdiction and have a meeting and, talk through some of the issues that we have.
Thank you, Kim. Anything else? Hearing none, let's call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time and your help.
Rachel, you sent me some emails on some contract issues, and I just need some clarification. I would like to discuss it. But is this a special meeting, Paul, or are we obligated to only stick to the agenda items?
I guess we're gonna need to get Martin.
I think it said other new business and,
He has a question on what we can discuss at this meeting.
What did our meeting notice say?
Is it a problem having any other
oh
discussion?
yeah, I just have to, I'm gonna get
No,
peppered
of course,
with
you're
questions,
gonna ask
so.
Our meeting notice say.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask specifically about sex offenders, I'm glad that Martin did,
Yep.
but I didn't know how to.
Did a good job covering.
Yeah. Some of those vulnerable entities, I think you have to be really
Well,
careful,
yeah.
but knowing the police would be called and.
Fortunately, they're very close to
I would prefer that
Any other meeting is a special meeting. So, I mean,
Oh,
in
yeah.
respect
I
to
mean,
what we called it, it's special.
But I think given all the information, I wish I just had it a little bit earlier.
Well, yeah, that was the same with me.
I'm like, all I'm reading is what I see in the obviously it's been in the works for a little while, 'cause they've taken a tour, they've looked and stuff.
I've always taken the position that this means, if you're going to
Yeah, I
take
don't think they
action,
wanted to come up with this size.
this is the only
That was
item.
the feeling I got, that they really wanna be up this high.
You wanna have
I'm just wondering when
discussion
Queens Bearing Glen Falls are gonna
somewhat
merge.
light about something.
Really, I mean, at what point do we start to absorb everything from the city?
Course of action, we have to bring it to a close.
Really?
And you can help out with it anyways.
Have to have a city.
You okay with that?
Yeah, but there's many towns out there, from what I understand, the population that are, yeah.
I just discussed with Martin, I know there's some implications on special meetings, et cetera, but he thinks that's only on items that you're gonna take action on. We wanna have a discussion, which certainly would be fine, and we're gonna have facility, the regular meeting, just after Thanksgiving, so it's not that too far in the offing. But if you wanna bring to the floor some of the discussion items that you'd like to cover, and if we get off track, Martin certainly will intercept and.
That's fine. I just so you all know, and I think a couple people were copied, I had sent, Chairman Gerard a question about all of the contracts that we have with Siemens. You know, it was my understanding there were 3 major ones, but I know that within some of those, there's some subcontracts. I don't even know if that's the right word.
Fine.
You know, but more than what I thought existed, and as back in January, we had a discussion with special counsel, and I believe, Martin, you were there as well, amongst other people, about looking into additional contracts, the 2 specifically with Municipal Center and Countryside, and are we really seeing those savings? I know we've canceled, previous boards have canceled the, performance contracts, so it's difficult to know really, you know, where's the savings if it exists, and recently, Travis Whitehead has done a lot of work on, do we have those savings that perhaps we thought we were getting, and in fact has uncovered that there's a significant loss to the county. What I'm wondering is, we're looking at one progen, with Westmount and the efficiencies there. What are we doing as a county to look at these other contracts and ensuring either we're taking appropriate steps to either cease them, change them, ask for accountability, or are we really seeing savings? You know, what are we doing as a county to look at what we know is a questionable arrangement?
These, Martin, I think you had some discussions, these are contracts that we entered into. Can you answer from a legal point of view as far as the ramifications if they aren't being lived up to, or if they're incorrect, or how we proceed with, actually with what Travis is engaging in now?
Well, I mean, I think that as far as prudence goes, I mean, if you want to look at these, and I don't think that's a discussion for that's a course of action that you want to commit to today. I think that has to be the subject of a separate meeting. I have no problem discussing it in sort of very broad terms. But I think if you want to discuss what to do, I think the prudent course of action is to, have options available for discussion at another meeting. I don't think we are really prepared here to say that, this is what you ought to do or what you shouldn't do. I'm not suggesting that you don't look at this. What I'm suggesting is that if you're going to look at this in a comprehensive, understandable way, it's going to require a very thorough legal review. It's going to, which is going to be time consuming. Not to suggest that that can't be done, but I think as far as what should be done, I think before you say let's do this or let's do that, I think you need to have a better understanding of what the contracts provide for and a better understanding of what the consequences of certain options may be should you choose to pursue those options. That's my view. That's always going to be my view, of sort of the more prudent, conservative course in anything like this. Again, I'm not suggesting that you do not, I'm not suggesting that you do not take a look at it, but rather than have a discussion of what to do or what we're not doing or what we should be doing, I think it's better better for all of us to understand precisely what the contracts say and precisely what certain options or consequences may be as a result of pursuing those options. And I don't think that's a discussion that we're ready to have today.
Would that be admissible to bring it to the next county facilities meeting and?
Right, I think at some point we really need to formally have this discussion. I know in January I informally requested it in a committee, not a formal committee meeting, but a side meeting. In October, an executive session, there were some discussions about it. So I think at this point it would be really helpful to take a formal step towards what is the official county's response on these additional contracts. And, you know, I'm a firm believer at this point that we need to do something. We need to be able to have an answer. And what I'm hearing answers from Travis, but every time I'm asking the county, is he right? You know, what are we doing here? I'm not hearing answers. And I would just like to be a little more educated about it and making sure that we're going into another budget year with a lot of money dedicated towards these contracts, and yet, you know, and Mark can probably speak a little bit better on that regarding the boiler situation, you know, but I'm getting a little confused on what exactly we're having in terms of savings. I don't know if you wanna, can I do that? Can I like head over to somebody else to finish my comment?
Yeah, good.
Is that allowed?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be happy to say what I think. I've read everything that Travis has written on this. And I took the tour with Travis of the system and with Frank and John, and I'm formulating my own thoughts. My feeling is that the county should respond formally to Travis and should look at it from a legal standpoint. And I'm okay with doing a more thorough discussion at the next county facilities meeting. I think that's a prudent course of action. But I would say that I was startled by what I read and what I heard from Frank and John about the system. I thought for years the geothermal was running in the winter, and that's why people had space heaters and blankets in their office, and I found out that that wasn't true. So that alone kind of surprised me. I didn't know that. It's not running in the winter time. So, yeah, I think we need to take a hard look at it and decide what we're going to do about it as a county.
Okay, and the hard look that we're going to look at, is this specifically from Travis's investigation and what he's producing for us to move forward?
Well, you know, Travis has been very candid about his work. You know, he's more than willing to sit down and be shown differently if that's the case. So I don't think this is all about Travis. I think
No,
Travis
and I'm not saying that, but I mean for us to move forward, to get a pivot point as to where we start and how we proceed, is that the impetus of what's coming before us today?
Yeah, because I think he's raised questions that
I mean,
don't
without what
agree
Travis
with.
has supplied, you know, we don't have questions.
No, to be
We have a
fair, I've had questions in January and October, which I've addressed with county officials and leadership, and have asked, are we seeing a savings? Are these contracts valid? Is it working? and I haven't had answers since January.
Yeah, and I really think that's
I think
just what Travis.
that's an interesting discussion, because when we entered into those contracts, there was some changes and modifications that I think were upsetting to the formula that they worked on to set up that and what we were projecting, so, yeah, it gets kinda convoluted, so, I mean, that's one discussion, but then Travis has certainly been a lot more thorough than just that. That's my point. How detailed and orientated are we gonna get, and where do we wanna head with it? And the comparative analysis of it is that we investigated the cogen for 4 years, and look where we ended up.
Well, I think where we ended up was to verify a lot of the concerns, and I think we do need to verify if these concerns that have been raised are legitimate. So I certainly hope it doesn't take 4 years. You know, there are very specific things that really shouldn't be that difficult to address. Like in one meeting minutes, it was stated that NYSERDA could come in and analyze it and determine whether or not the energy efficiencies were true, and, you know, it's a simple question, did that ever take place? That should be an easy answer. If it did, then let's see the NYSERDA report. If it didn't, then, you know, let's get NYSERDA in here and put the onus on them to take a look at it. It's been stated in meeting minutes that that was gonna take place. So, you know, that to me is an easy one. A harder one is gonna be an audit, you know, if we have to bring in another Enernac type to audit it. And then that gets into performance guarantees, and were the stipulated savings in the contract actually achieved, and if not, what were the actual savings? And then what are the implications from a legal standpoint? That's something that's much more complicated, you know, so I think there are different levels of this.
Yeah, and Rachel?
I guess, you know, and Dan, what I would say is, when you said, look where we ended up with a very comprehensive report as it related to the cogen facility and whether we're getting our bang for our buck. And so, you know, we took a vote as a board, regarding a performance issue with an employee. We didn't take a vote as a board on whether or not we felt that the information presented to us regarding the cogen and its validity and its accuracy was something that we all supported or not. You know, I think that we need to recognize that this report also had a lot of information in it about the cogen facility and what's happened as a result of these contracts. I mean, are they working? And to say, look where we ended up, I mean, we have a lot of information in front of us that's been verified by a lot of officials on that we're not getting our money out of the cogen.
And I thought...
What about our other contracts, is my question.
Yeah, but I mean, don't convolute. What I'm saying is, we had questions on the cogen. We hired independent engineers that came in and told us $65,000 you've lost compared if you were on the grid. When I asked the question, if we didn't tear down the building, we're still utilizing it, would that loss been the same amount? They said no. So some of it was us shooting ourselves in the foot. That's my point. It cost us money to have the engineers come in and look at that. It was informative, it was good. Secondarily, what you're talking about was a different issue with the county administrator, at the time, county attorney.
But
So those are the issues I'm saying. Where do you want to go with this? We have a contract, and are we looking at the contract, and if we're getting our savings or not getting our savings, or the variables that come into context that might have changed or made those things all relevant, we need to give a pivot point to start.
And I would say, yes, we should look at the contract, take a look at the stipulated savings in the agreement versus what actually happened, and I would like to specifically request that be done.
Okay, and we'll put that on the agenda next meeting, and then we'll have the legal implications, and then how we can proceed if we need engineers, et cetera. Is there any other, Ron, you always lend well to the discussion?
Well, I think that, unless it's so complicated that, I mean, it would be, might be a good thing to have our staff just take an initial look at it, which, to ascertain whether they feel that, you know, it's, there are savings there or not savings there, and, I mean, the contract says what the contract says, and, I mean, that's a legal matter, question, of, you know, is what we're paying is what the taxpayer's paying to provide heat for these facilities, by today's standard? You know, is that a good deal? And that would be a dollars and cents kind of thing, and maybe just an initial pass by some people reviewing that, might not, if possible, would be not a lot of money, and we would have something that we could reference, you know, and now, if the answer came up, let's just do the options, if the answer comes back, yeah, it was a pretty good deal, and, okay, fine, and if it's not a good deal, you know, what does the contract say to it? And, you know, so perhaps the conclusion is, by today's standard, wasn't that good a contract, that might be. But I think in terms of the dollars and cents, you know, maybe we could take, I mean, we know how many square feet there are in the building, right? We know, you know, we know what we're paying for energy, and under our new, multi-year contract, per kilowatt hour, I mean, I would assume that we could make some general analysis that, and if not, well, then the report would be too sophisticated for us. Like you're saying, we need to have, you know, someone else, take a look at this. But that's how I would approach it, just as if it was your own house, right? If
Yeah.
you're heating your house with, electricity, and your analysis says you can do better with, oil, right? Then maybe the contract you have for your electricity wasn't such a good thing to enter into, by today's standard. I mean, I would assume that's the sum of what you're saying. And it would relate to the two facilities, at least two facilities that we have.
Well, to every contract that we have with Siemens, but,
Okay, well,
I
then
mean,
I don't know how, how many we have, but we could at least start with the two largest contracts we have, and we could take a quick look at it.
There's
Maybe it's,
Martin
you know,
knows
it's like when you buy oil. I mean, so you buy oil, you're trying to anticipate the market, and
There are, Mr. Chairman, there are three contracts, and there were a number of sort of subcontracts related to purchasing, construction, development back in 2006, 2007, which were all related in some way or another. My understanding is that those contracts necessary at the time, all of the terms of those contracts have been fulfilled. And then there was the one contract that was never executed or furthered, for the DPW facility. We're looking at three contracts. I don't think we're necessarily looking at this go-around at the Westmount contract. I think we're looking at the municipal center and countryside is what we're looking at.
and the subcontracts within them, they're applicable. But you're saying they're not applicable, they're all expired.
I think those were subcontracts that were entered into for purposes of development, construction, purchasing of equipment, meters, those kinds of things. I think those are done. We'd let you know about them because we wanted you to know that they were out there and that they were executed and that they were a part of this. But I don't think we're going to look at those contracts for purposes of determining whether or not savings generated is the savings promised.
Well, but however, I do think it's important, and I think Travis has a great understanding on this. He's worked with our staff so far about it. I guess what I would be asking is, if he's willing, if our staff is willing, maybe over the next, until our next facilities meeting, a lot of this work has been done, maybe he could work with our staff and come up with just a report that we can understand, just something that, let's give it a little due diligence here, and I guess, I don't mean to sound frustrated, but to find out some more information, and not have a county's response is a little
So we could get, so we get a little focused and then proceed. I think, yeah, I think that's admirable. Because when we sign the contracts, the assumption is that they're performed and they're legal binding agreements, and if they're not being executed properly, that's fraud, and, that's, so. Evelyn?
I guess I'd prefer to have our county folks do this, do the initial pass. Travis has done his thing, he's had his say. Rather than listen to another Travis rendition, I'd like to hear what our people have to say. I'd like to see both sides, and then do a comparison. I think if you're having somebody who wrote one also assist with the other, you're gonna get cross-contamination. So I would rather just see our folks do this, at least in the initial version. Maybe later on the road we bring Travis in or something like that, but right now I'd like to see our people come back to us with information. That would be my preference.
Okay, Fred?
Yeah, I've read everything Travis has done, and I think he makes some good points, and I agree, I think it should be initially our staff, but I think what they should focus on is you know, the actual compared to stipulated, if they're stipulated in these other contracts, because on the actual, you know, unless you have a crystal ball, you don't know what's gonna happen in the future. And so, electric rates are down, fuel oil costs are down, and if everything's based on actual, then you're probably not gonna, you know, realize the savings. But, so I think it should be a focus on anything that was stipulated, at least initially, on the legal reason.
I think, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that's a very good point. I mean, we just entered into an electric contract, for example, because we thought it was a good rate, and we locked onto it. Now, if it dropped a lot further, then I guess we didn't enter into a very good contract. But obviously, our concern, at least my concern at the time, was we had what I thought was pretty much a historically low rate on electricity, and the concern that at some point those rates might start up, and then we would be caught in a different spot. So it's kind of like even with your home, you sort of at some point you sort of have to pick your poison, so to speak. I mean, that's one type of analysis, but it would seem to me that, you know, how much heat this building uses, as an example, given the heat loss, given everything else, is X amount, right? And it costs you X to heat it. Adjusted for, you know, the changes, you know, I suppose we could take a look at it and come to some evaluation, you know, was that a good arrangement to come into back when they went into that arrangement? We could come to that conclusion. Perhaps it wasn't a good arrangement, but perhaps it was. I mean, that's what you get when you start dealing with these energy kinds of things. A lot of those arrangements were entered into at a time, I believe, when energy was really taking off, so there was some concern, you know, relative to, you know, trying to get into a situation where you could try to lock on to something that was lower than where it was going. But I think that we should be able to, with our own staff, at least take an initial pass on this.
Mark, you had something?
I was just gonna say, I think Evelyn and Rachel got it right, you know, have the county, take a hard look at it, and then, I'd have them sit down with Travis and have a discussion and see if they can come to mutual agreement on it. That would be great. If they disagree, then they can respectfully disagree with one another.
Okay. Matt?
Another part is the legal side or the contractual side that, maybe just because I don't understand the whole items behind the contract, but, you know, I equate it to like when we buy insurance policies, sometimes they give you a, basis of what your projection 30 years down the road is on a 6% return or 4% return, and you agree to those terms, and I know there's been several times in the last 10 years that people that I know, investment people, they've had to supplement their contracts to keep them in effect because they didn't perform under the contract. Now, no law was broken, no hanky-panky was done, it was just, nobody can forecast down the road. So I think, you know, depending on the information, I think we also need to take a look at the legal part of it as, did we put ourselves in this position just because we're looking at hypothetical energy costs? Or, you know, was there something that you know, something else? But I think that's important too, before we, depending on, I think it's important in the end.
Okay. Travis?
Thank you. I'd just like to say, you know, energy price, you're absolutely right. Energy pricing is one part of this whole thing, and the contract specifies what that will be, and there's a certain amount of savings, you know, based on that. Aside from that, what I focused on when I got the bills was the energy consumption in kilowatt hours and therms. So if I just talk about that, and a suggestion for the committee is that what I found is their projections were that they were going to save 41% of the electricity after this is done. And what I found is you saved 18%. These are based on the bills that came in 2009 and 2010. So there's a substantial difference there. And on gas, they had projected a 72% drop in gas consumption when we only had an 11% drop. And then, so that's on the consumption side. Then when you figure out that they were saying 72% drop at a rate that was maybe 4 times higher than actual, you know, it gets into the very big numbers. A lot of them are kind of phony. A lot of them, it's just what Matt said, can't do anything about it. The contract says that. However, the point that I wanted to make, the suggestion for the committee, is part of what they had agreed to do is that there would be an audit done by them, this is Siemens, post-installation, where they would verify their consumption numbers. And they should be able to see the same things that I'm seeing, or show me where I'm wrong, that, you know, where they forecast a 72% drop in gas, did we actually get a 72%? You know, they were supposed to do that. That was part of the contract, and I would say, you know, I agree with what Ms. Wood has to say. I don't need to be in the middle of this. I only got involved with this because kind of the gauntlet was thrown down by Mr. Ligori when he said we've got all these other wonderful things here. And but the fact of the matter is, ask Siemens. You know, this is what you're supposed. Can you verify what this is? Because our bills don't seem to reflect it. And you know, I actually went down yesterday and looked at the number on the meter, on the gas meter there with Frank to verify that the bills I'm looking at were attached to that meter that I'm, you know, thinking that they are, because that was the one question I had. So I think there's some real problems there, and Siemens is the one that should be answering those questions first.
Okay, Mark?
So that's the kind of thing I think, you know, Martin and Amy can look into right away and just determine, you know, is he right? You know, is that a contractual obligation of Siemens? So I think those are the sorts of easy ones that won't take a lot of time and effort. Just need somebody to go and look into it.
Rachel?
I'm just looking for an official response from the county. I think we owe it to our taxpayers. I think we owe it to, you know, Travis has put in a lot of work, but we also owe it to ourselves to find out, you know, is this working, is it working well? I know that it is freezing in the winter in the Board of Supervisors room, and in the summer it's boiling hot. I sit right underneath the vent. But I also know we have space heaters everywhere in this county. We have people that are freezing, and some of that, as Martin pointed out to me one day in his office, is just the windows. It's old. But I would really, we put money in for a new boiler system, and you know, from what I'm reading, was that supposed to be covered by Siemens? We're supposed to be not using that as our primary source of heat, and that was just supposed to be a backup. That's a big ticket item in the budget, you know. So, or I shouldn't say big, but a ticket item in the budget. So I guess I'm looking for a formal response. I appreciate you hearing me out about it, and you know, it'd be nice to be able to say to the people that do have those space heaters and are freezing, you know, here's why, and we're gonna try to do something about it.
Good. Anyone else?
I mean,
Peter?
Just one quick observation. I'm looking at the minutes here of February 27th, 2007, and a lot of the concern and information relative to these minutes talk about NYSERDA. They talk about NYSERDA being involved. They talk about their expertise, the fact that essentially they're going to be a check and a balance on the system that Siemens was proposing. So we have a foundation which is built in the minutes, and then NYSERDA apparently never got involved, and which I just posed that question. And when you know, when we have the facilities meeting, to maybe try to get an answer to that question, because again, you have a public record that says, in effect suggests that we're going to have an independent third party be a checkpoint for the credibility and integrity of the system that Siemens was proposing. And it never happened. And the question I ask is, why didn't it happen? Because again, this is, and the minutes indicate that the reason NYSERDA was involved is that they have all of this wonderful taxpayer-supported low-interest loans which support the integrity of energy projects that make sense. So there just seems to be a real inconsistency in building up to the approval of what occurred in this building, again, suggesting that there would be a checks and a balance in place with NYSERDA. NYSERDA never got involved. And so my question is, during the course of our next meeting, I just posed that question. So that we could answer that question also.
Okay. And we'll, Jim?
It, I have a question for Travis. Is the baseline expressed in terms of like kilowatts and all that, or is it expressed in terms of money?
Kilowatts and therms.
So we can then measure, without getting involved in prices going up and down, whether they perform the contract correctly or not, or achieve the goal.
Yes.
And that's measurable under any circumstance.
Yeah.
What is the score, that they make the score, or however you want to put it?
And Travis has made it easy, because he's already tracked all the information down. All it needs to be is verified.
Or I did it wrong and you can tell me I did it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, but I
I'm as
think
interested in
for,
knowing as anyone else.
I mean, I trust Travis, but
It's not
for
the point.
everyone, for the public to know,
Needs to be
our
verified.
people need to, yeah, it needs to be verified, which is what I want.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll have that on the next facilities committee meeting and authorize some movement to check into the contracts, et cetera, and report back, and move on from there. Anything else to come before the committee? Hearing none, motion to adjourn. Ron, second by Rachel. All in favor? Aye? Aye.
Hey, Dan,
Is it
when-
1 or 1:30?
I'll have to check with